This is Glass Houses by Ava Jane Jacobs Hawes. Chapter 1. You weren't supposed to touch the glass, but the men had their backs to her. She pressed a finger against its cold surface at the spot where the baby form flattened its warm, furry rear on the other side. The 2-inch thickness was like a double pane, and she could see an echo of her finger mirrored next to the little creature. There were 5 of them, little rabbits with just the frailest, fluffiest coats of fur, their baby eyes blinking softly, their clean little noses wrinkling, such fragile little noses. Don't let him find them. She could hear the soft slapping of the Yeti's gallop as he tore around and around Peace Grotto in his run. The microphones picked up his sounds and sent them out into the viewing areas over the voices of the men. She could hear the little rabbits, too. If she had been on the other side with them, they might have seemed silent, but their soft breathing and the little brushing sounds of their movement came whispering out of the amplifiers if you stood near. Peace Grotto was alive on the other side of the glass, with thousands of little breathings. The breathings and tiny shrieks of the bats in Bat Cave, the scampering of the lizards, the squeaks and chitters of little rodents, and the jagged breath of the Yeti as he prowled his plastic kingdom. She had dreamed several times that the beast was chasing her, and finally one night her dream had brought him right up to her bedroom door. She was terrified. She saw no place to run to, so in her dream she had put her hand out to it to tame it. You have to show animals you're not afraid of them. The dream Yeti had to stoop double in order to come through her door, its long arms hanging like 2 white hairy legs, the backs of the enormous fingers brushing her carpet. But he had let her reach up to pet him. Of course, when she woke up, she realized it hadn't been Barney at all, but an enormous collie like old Biscuit, who was sure to dip his head down and lean up against her if she were to come home again, just the way the dream creature had. Biscuit was home in Casper, Wyoming, sleeping under the step just like always, but the poor Yeti had been snatched away from its glaciers and was cowering now among strangers, longing for something familiar, just the way Biscuit would. She appreciated the fact that the White House had spent 40 million or 400 million or however much making a facsimile of a lair, but even old Biscuit would have been smart enough not to be comforted by a $40 billion lair. She could imagine somebody duplicating her mother's mobile home at great expense, calling in experts to fray the cushions on the couch and stain the linoleum, and then trying to fool Biscuit, and she knew very well that it couldn't be done. Even Biscuit, who was so dumb you could trick him into the house every time by slamming the refrigerator door. The baby rabbit sneezed a baby sneeze and snuggled against the glass. Don't get attached to it. It was born to die. She understood that. There wasn't much point in wishing it health. It was Barney's food, and she didn't want him to starve. She loved Barney, now that she saw how much like Biscuit he was. But he had plenty of little rabbits stashed away now in the ice cave. Wishing he wouldn't find this one for a while wasn't at all like wishing he would starve. maybe he could kill some fish. And in fact, he did pause before the glass tunnel that passed over the great grotto hallway and down into the pool. Or he could kill bats. He could slip into the icy pool and then up through the submerged opening into Bat Cave. Or he could go swing on the swings in the playroom area. But instead, he climbed up the mirrored passage that connected the run to the cave mouth area, pausing for a moment over their heads with his large feet and one hand pressing against the one-way mirror above her before he climbed down into the small mammal area. The men continued to talk, not even noticing Marnie's approach, certainly not noticing the threat to the little rabbits. Marilyn's hand was now pressed flat against the spot where the babies cuddled, as if to protect them. "Don't move," she commanded silently, and as if in response, the little animals became tense and still, sensing the stranger as he entered the glass island of their home. The nest was behind a rock outcropping. It was possible, but it was like wishing the Gestapo would never find Anne Frank. You knew they would. It was like wishing East Casper High would get 27 points in the fourth quarter and win after all. Barney snuffed and coughed and sat on a rock, his chin cupped in his hands, for all the world like a discouraged young man. If he hadn't been 9 feet tall, one could almost imagine him a man. A lot of his movements were almost human. His enormous hands grasped things like human hands. He stood upright most of the time, and now and then he crossed his arms in front of his great chest like a human. Marilyn willed him away. "There's something scary in here," she thought intensely. "Go eat a nice juicy bat. Go take a little dip in the pool. You don't want to be here." He stood up as if in response to her thought and moved towards her. She bit her lip. "Don't be childish," she told herself. "Don't even think about it. It's just nature. It's just the call of the wild." But she couldn't help it. Nature or not, she didn't want Barney to eat this one particular little baby rabbit. She wanted desperately for him not to eat this one particular furry little rabbit. She glanced at Jason. No help there. His small, compact body leaned lightly against a large pillar, but not as if he required anything to hold him. Marilyn was only too familiar with Jason's electric energy, and she understood that what held Jason up was not support from the pillar, but invisible elastic pulls from several different directions. This vital conflict had made him rigid in bed, but here in his milieu he was terribly attractive. He understood how to make things go his way here. What would he do if she asked him to save the rabbits? Don't even think about it. In contrast to Jason, Wells was plump and loose. His expensive suit looked like he'd slept in it, and the pants gapped at the fly where they were fastened with a safety pin. Jason, with his youth, his clean, handsome precision, was like a foil to the older man, who, in spite of a look of dissipation, commanded the room as if it had been a stage, as if Jason had been put there simply to explicate his complex and not altogether likable character. "It has to do with elections, my boy," he was saying. He spoke with warmth, but with a slight edge of condescension, with elaborate effect, as though cameras were tight in on him. Jason was listening alertly, as if to a sage. It has to do with the elections. 2 years ago, when we were in the first blushing flush of planning, everybody was flying high on ethics. We all congratulated ourselves on how high minded we were. We debated the pros and cons of power, and we decided that if this thing were going to work, we needed to abstain from power. And then we proceeded to sit down and work out how exactly we were going to do that. After all, one doesn't just abstain from power if one happens to be the holder of the reins. So, what we decided was we needed to let somebody else hold some of the reins. You understood that. Everybody understood that. I congratulate myself that even Archie understood that. But it's all changed, hasn't it? The actuality has corrupted us. Archie has begun to think less in terms of a lasting peace and more in terms of what his constituents are going to say when they find out we had a chance to run the entire world from right here in Washington, D.C., and we didn't take it. He's calculated the political risks of morality, and he has decided he isn't willing to take the chance. I'm not in Archie's camp, said Jason. I'm not in anybody's camp. You know that. You've known me long enough to know that. All I said was, look, Doc, let's face it. We can't risk leaving the Soviet army intact. That is just plain ridiculous. It didn't sound so ridiculous 2 years ago. Doc, we never agreed to leave the Soviet army intact. What about that option where they rush in and hold Europe hostage before we can respond? Ah, said Wells, far be it from me to insist upon something we never agreed upon. Jason was getting tight, the way he did with Marilyn when he felt she was being irrational. Jason was a man who believed people always secretly lived up to their capabilities. When they did things that were dumber than necessary, he thought they were being dumb on purpose. Of course, he may well have been right, that Wells's stubbornness was calculated and not from an inability to see the truth. Doc, said Jason, we made the decision about Soviet troop levels 6 months ago. Why are you doing this? We are right down to the wire, Doc. This is not the time to be debating broad policy decisions. At this point in time, what we need to be concerned about is essentials. Essentials, Doc. Implementation. It was absolutely impossible to even consider interrupting these men about the rabbits. The very thought of interrupting them made Marilyn shiver. On the other hand, Barney had gotten a whiff of the warren. He was grunting and huffing in excitement as he pulled away plastic rocks to reveal the nest. The thought came to her that his looming nearness might distract them from their conversation. How could they help but be distracted with a 9-foot creature rooting anxiously within feet of them? She began to phrase a little comment in her mind, ready for the moment when they noticed the commotion. But isn't it a pity these little rabbits have to die? Look at this little white one. See the gold in his fur. When he had dug away a little opening, Barney wiped the long shock of hair away from his white monkey face and pressed his leathery cheek against the glass in order to peek down into the rabbit hole. Marilyn involuntarily stepped back. Oh, he was so enormous. His head seemed half as big as she was. The long, coarse white hairs that curled around him like a sparse cloud were pressed into the short auburn fur that covered his shoulder. His eyes were so intense. They glowed red, the sign said, because he was nocturnal. His face was so nearly human, and so very far from being human. He squinted one eye in order to see better into the hole, and gingerly reached a large hand in, feeling with his enormous fingers for the little animals, obviously leery of getting bit. Marilyn was miserable. It's only nature, she told herself, but she could hardly stand the thought of what was coming. Then, with a wheezing grunt that whistled through the microphones into her ears, he found a little one and grabbed it. Not hers. He brushed the long hair away from his face again and peered at it closely. The lipless mouth relaxed into a tender little smile. He bent his head quizzically and popped the rabbit in his mouth whole, a distant pleasure clouding his gaze. Marilyn turned her eyes away so as not to see the chewing, but the slurping spat out through the microphones. It was inevitable now. He would eat them all now. Nothing could stop it. Unless she could pound on the glass and scare him away herself. Oh, no, no, impossible. It was strictly against the rules to scare him. But the men had their backs to her. In 3 days the project would be over. The offices would be cleared away from the wide corridors, and Peace Grotto would open to the public. Imagine standing back against the ropes and watching this. No matter how determined they might have been to love nature, she knew very well that lots of people would end up rooting for the baby rabbits just like she had. And what would happen to poor Barney if they were allowed to knock on the glass and scare him away? It was unthinkable. But when Barney, almost purring with contentment, reached once again into the warren, she did it anyway, without even thinking about it. She placed her knuckles on the glass not 2 inches from his enormous head and knocked. Tap, tap, tap. Barney froze. His little eyes moved to the place where Marilyn had knocked. For a moment he was very still. Then, all of a sudden, his eyes came into focus. He was seeing himself in the mirror of the glass. He leaped back away in an enormity of overreaction that made her stumble away too, made Jason duck and step aside, and even caught the attention of Wells, who paused in mid-sentence, mouth open, and watched dully as 1,200 pounds of terror crashed into a plastic boulder and ripped a small hole in it. The breath poured out of Barney's body in a strange animal cry, and in an instant that locomotive mass had scrambled up into the overhead tunnel, scampered over her head and into the dark safety of the run, and was away. In his wake echoed the strange bird-like call that had haunted the grotto since his arrival, clear-voiced like an owl's. It carried, embedded in its vibration, the body of Barney's misery. She was immediately sorry. Oh, so sorry. I'm sorry, she said under her breath. She listened helplessly as Barney galloped in lopsided terror the entire circumference of the grotto, stopping short of passing the entrance into cave mouth, wheeling and galloping back. "What's the matter with the creature tonight?" said Wells, finally. Marilyn made the beginning of a noise in her throat to confess, but he didn't notice her. Maybe it's not such a good time to block the access entrance." "Gotta be done," said Jason. Maybe we should think about waiting until he's quieter. The grotto was nearly empty tonight. A typewriter clattered somewhere. The sounds of the Yeti's panic were amplified into the great halls, through the glass windows into though the glass windows into the run were largely hidden by the temporary offices which had been erected against the outer walls in order to provide absolute security for the peace project. It was deemed easier to keep unauthorized individuals away from a quarantine area than from a mere, quote, secret, end quote, area. The Yeti's run was absolutely pitch black inside, or at least that's what the sign said. There was not a glimmer of light to reflect off the one-way mirror or to cast shadows or to spoil the creature's sense of perfect security when he retreated cowering from the glass islands where he found his food and where he sometimes encountered white-coated handlers. But from inside the offices, the run was clearly visible through the glass, lit by infrared light, which illumined the specially constructed bake rock and ice as if it were in the moonlight. And Monday morning, after the detonations, when the grotto was opened to the public to inaugurate Peace Day, the offices would be gone and the run would be completely visible. It encircled Peace Grotto, simulating the mile-long tunnel found in Barney's home cavern by the spelunkers who had trapped him in the Himalayas. The tunnel was 12 feet high, giving ample headroom for him to stand upright, but Barney crouched over anyway as he ran, using one hand as a kind of third foot to propel him along, his loping, sideways gallop designed to take up the least room possible through the black space. How long would he live, she wondered, if he lost his sense of privacy? What would happen to him if he were to discover that he could be seen even in the darkest and iciest corner of his vast cave? If he were to discover that every sigh was heard and noted, every heartbeat counted. "Look at him," said Wells, as Barney passed the open space beside the cave mouth entrance, then wheeled and scurried back around his run the other way. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? All this is getting to him at last. I submit to you, Peabody, that our beloved country, the United States of America, is in many important ways like that monster. Many important ways." "It's perfectly safe," said Jason. "Yes, in his natural habitat. I suspect that thing is a noble being indeed. Yes, a monarch. He rules the countryside. His courage and his strength have no match. Yes, like us. That's the way we are. Inarticulate, maybe. Brutal, yes. Outrageous. We are big and hulking, but there are many things that threaten us. China threatens us. Russia threatens us. Poor boy. We know how you feel, don't we, Jason? But you don't need to worry as long as you're in there. Nothing in that entire cage is capable of fighting back. We have declouthed, detoothed, declawed, debeaked everything that goes near you. Now, Doc, but it doesn't reassure him, does it? Because he has discovered the existence of people, and it's not so easy to declaw people, because it's not their weapons that make them dangerous. He has the same problem we do. In order to be completely safe around people, it's not enough to disarm them. You have to make friends. He's got a whole task force of friends in there, Doc. You can't very well call a white-coated intern a potential friend. You might as well try to make friends with a robot. There's no appeal to anything but reason within the scientific community, Jason, my boy. This creature is us. This is the United States of America in 3 days. 3 days alone in a disarmed camp of people. We will have nobody we can trust. Think of yourself in a week, my boy, and try to find compassion in your heart for Bongo here, or whatever his name is. I think at this point in time, Doc, said Jason. Come, my dear, said Wells, putting his hand on Marilyn's arm. Surely you can find compassion in your heart for this poor creature. What's her name? Marilyn? Marilyn. Do you see, Peabody, sometimes it takes finer sensibilities to respond fully to the sensibilities of woman. Woman. Marilyn. Put yourself in his place, Marilyn. Imagine yourself the only great power left in the whole world, alone, standing alone. There is absolutely no danger. All other predators have been disposed of. Disposed of. You have absolute power. And yet, there is something out there. Out there. And you can't seem to make contact with it. Ha ha, said Jason. But how to approach it? Jesus Christ, it's humanity. Humanity out there. She can't imagine it. Yes, I can, said Marilyn. Look at her face, said Wells. She's wonderful. Peabody, we are going to be at war in 10 years if we don't learn the trick of making friends with beings that scare us. Total war. The most vicious and annihilating war imaginable. No nuclear weapons. They won't need weapons. They'll rise up against us. Lay off, Doc. Look at her face. Hi, Doc. Peabody, said a white-frocked man who appeared at the entrance to the adjustment room. Spitzenhammer, said Wells. Spitzenhammer, look, is this business really safe? Well, said Spitzenhammer, he's pretty hyper. It's safe, said Jason. And we haven't been able to fix that electrical problem, the one I was telling you about. Is that going to be serious? No, not serious. No threat to the environment, but it affects the working of the safety door, the door from the run into the playroom. Safe, he says, said Wells. He does not understand human beings to be food, said Jason. He has made not a single aggressive move towards a single human being since his capture. It is perfectly safe. Safe, well, but is it necessary? That's really my question. Is it necessary? Doc, said Jason, we have 34 level 4 need to know people who do not have crypto clearance. We are beginning countdown. We cannot have traffic in and out of control, and we can't announce that we can't have traffic in and out of control. We've gone all over this. This is simply the most efficient way of sealing room A. That's all. Okay, said Doc. Of course, I have no objection. There's no reason you have to use this route. No reason at all. We can ferry you around. Through the White House? No problem. It'll add maybe 5 minutes to your itinerary. Or we could use runners. No reason you have to go back and forth. Actually, said Wells, I'm kind of looking forward to it. I was just asking if it was necessary, that's all. If it was necessary. They passed through a room of video screens and dials into the adjustment room. Here, said Spitzenhammer, we'll fit you out with overcoats. Not necessary, said Wells. No, not necessary, said Jason. But Marilyn felt the thinning air chill her shoulders and wished she had the nerve to ask one for one herself. Of course she had worn that silly dress. She caught Spitzenhammer looking down the front at her bosom and wished for about the fifth time today that she'd worn something else. Wells put his hand again on Marilyn's arm. Kind of catches the imagination, doesn't it? He said. Kind of gets you. Not just his, mythological quality. I mean, rarity is intriguing all by itself, but yes, rarity. But it's more with this one. More. Yes, it's more. It's because he comes so close to being a man. He gets so sad, said Marilyn. Sad, yes. And so scared. Out of the mouths of babes, said Wells. Did you hear that, Peabody? Out of the mouths of babes. It's like looking in a mirror to see that beast. He's the dream self, the doppelganger. Did you notice his sex organs are hidden down between his legs? Very discreet. That, I'm told, is a feature that marks him definitely as an animal rather than a human. Everything is functional for him. He has nothing but real needs to preoccupy him. He has no way of removing himself from the moment. How would he ever learn mathematics? He would become frightened at the blackboard like everybody else who has any sense, and he would have nothing to take his mind off the fear. He would hide under a desk and run away when he could, instead of getting drunk afterwards and kissing a pretty girl, as we tend to do. To use an expression, yes, begging your pardon, nothing personal. His hand tightened on Marilyn's bare arm. You're trembling. I'm just cold, she said. Fear is contagious, said Wells. I'm not scared at all, said Marilyn, and breathed deeply of the cold air to make herself stop shaking. What if Barney were able to sense that it had been she who knocked on the glass? Don't think about it. Sorry for the delay, said Spitzenhammer. Barney's been hovering near the entrance to the playroom, and we'll have to wait for him to go on his way. Now, once you're inside, you'll have to wait just a moment for the door to be secured before we open up the passage into control. Normally, he stays pretty well clear when he notices somebody's in there. We haven't been able to get him to come in and socialize voluntarily yet. But there's an outside chance that he might come near the entrance again, and since our circuits are giving us trouble, if that happens, we'll have to wait until he leaves before we can open either of the doors again. That's for obvious safety reasons. Here, you can see on the monitor that he's moved away. Where is he then? Said Wells. I can't see him at all now. Well, that's our electrical problem. We have a little blackout here between section F and the ice cave. The lights are out in the run there too. Nothing serious. Here, he's moved into the neutral zone. When they stepped into the playroom, Marilyn caught her breath. It was like stepping into a picture she had been looking at. The ice was dazzling. She could see their reflections dimly in the icy walls, but she would never have guessed that there was another world beyond them. They had done a good Disneyland sort of job on the place. Uh-oh, said Spitzenhammer. Wouldn't you know it? Don't tell me, said Wells. Let me guess. And at that moment, Marilyn felt, rather than saw, an enormous shadow at the Yeti's entrance to the room, felt two eyes peering through layers of long hair at her, and knew he was there. At the same moment she smelled him. The pungent, stale odor enveloped the room like dozens and dozens of pairs of sweaty socks, like mouldered food or the acrid animal smell of dirty hair. "Ah," said Wells. "Hello there, old fellow. Yes, Barney, I would like you to meet Marilyn. Say hello to Barney, Marilyn." "There's no reason for alarm," said Spitzenhammer. "Keep it down," said Jason. "Don't want to scare him." "Good idea," said Wells. "Keep it down." And then, in a coaxing tone, "It's all right, boy. It's okay. We're not going to hurt you. Here, boy. Here, Bonzo." And then the Yeti stepped into the room with them. Marilyn could hardly breathe. She was so excited. He loomed above them, all 9 feet of him, watching them with a kind of quiet animal calm. She stifled an impulse to scream. "No cause for alarm," said Spitzenhammer softly, "but stand still. Stand very still." "This is incredible," said Doc. "Shut up, Doc," said Jason. The Yeti stepped closer and closer. It was just like in her dream. She could have reached out and touched him, although she sensed the animal tension that would have sent him barreling away down one of his dark corridors if he felt attacked. Then the impossible happened. He pulled his stiff hair away from his eyes with one hand, and with the other he reached towards Marilyn. "He wants your necklace," said Spitzenhammer under his breath. Of course, it was an ornate piece of costume jewelry with lots of colored glass. She moved her hands ever so slowly up to it and pulled it over her head. Then she extended it to him, but the creature stepped back away from her and slid silently from the room. "Incredible," said Doc. "We've got to get the knots ironed out of this thing, Spitzenhammer," said Jason. "We can't have this sort of display every time we want to pass from grotto into control. You can understand that." "We're working on it," said Spitzenhammer. Marilyn laid her necklace on the floor where the Yeti had stood. "Oh, Jason," she said, "did you see? He came right up to me. I can't believe it." But Jason was angry. She could see it in his brisk movements, his small, neat body, so precisely handsome, so coordinated, was now almost a parody of efficiency. If Wells and Spitzenhammer hadn't been standing right there, she would have snuggled up to him to nuzzle away the crisp, bitter lines on his face. But he would only have pushed her away anyway. His mood was so harsh. "I'll walk you back and get the tape out of my safe," he said. "We'll have to hurry because I'm late. If you don't have time tonight, I'll call Carla in." "Okay, Mr. Peabody," she said. "I have time."